While Europe was plunging into a wave of ostentation and absolutism, Portugal was ruled by one of the most womanizing and ostentatious kings in its history. He had a vast number of lovers, ranging from noblewomen, married women, and gypsies to nuns. But this raises a series of questions for us. How many lovers did he actually have? And what luxuries did he give them? Why did he try to seduce cloistered nuns and force his lovers to enter convents? And how did his scandalous behavior impact the politics of the kingdom, even after his death? In today's video, we will delve deeply into the controversies, intrigues, and nuances of the many lovers of Dom João Ferreira. We'll also find out how these vices impacted the politics of the kingdom and changed the course of history forever. But before we start the video, if you enjoy our content, become a member of our channel right now. That way you'll have access to our group and exclusive content, including live classes. To dive even deeper into the behind the scenes of history, to understand the loves and luxuries of Dom João Ferreira, we first need to understand the wave of absolutism that was sweeping across all of Europe. At that historical moment when Prince João was born, Europe was basking in the splendor of the Sun King, Louis XIV, with France increasingly positioning itself as the trendsetter of fashion on the continent. At that historical moment, it was extremely common for kings to have multiple lovers and flaunt a lot of luxury. One example was the Sun King himself, who had several lovers, such as Louise de la Vallière, Françoise Athénaïs de Montespan, and Françoise d'Aubigné. And luxury wasn't just a rule in royal households, but also a way for the monarch to reaffirm power. A king who knew how to be splendid was a king who would know how to reward his subjects and all those who rendered him services or favors. So, showing off was a way to gain loyalty, and having a reputation for being a spender also meant having a reputation as a good rewarder to those who serve the king. And it is in this context of thought that more and more shipments of gold collected as taxes arrive from Brazil, filling the public coffers of the Portuguese crown. In this way, the young Prince João, inspired by the old victorious and prestigious French king, begins to display his gallantry at the Portuguese court. The prince's first mistress appears when he is only 15 years old and falls in love with his mother's lady-in-waiting. The noblewoman Filipa de Noronha, who at that time was 22 years old, João for a long time showered the noblewoman with spicy letters and jewelry. And the prince's advances were so persistent that for a long time, Filipa believed she could one day become the Queen of Portugal. But noticing the young man's passion, they soon arranged his marriage to the Austrian princess, Maria Anna de Habsburgo, which put an end to Filipa's dream of becoming queen. According to Alberto Pimentel, João then tried to marry her off to Rodrigo César de Menezes, brother of the Count of Sabugosa, but the young woman completely refused, preferring to live reclusively in the Santa Clara monastery. From there, Filipa would write letters complaining to João, asking for titles and recognition, until her death in 1738, reclusive in the monastery and unmarried. Filipa, by all accounts, lived detached from life, disillusioned, and no longer sought any man, not even the king himself. And João, married to the Austrian Maria Anna, would soon seek out lovers, and he would have several. One of the most significant was, without a doubt, Luisa Clara, from Portugal, also known as Flor da Murta. Luisa Clara was married to Jorge Francisco de Menezes and was already the mother of 3 children. When she began her relationship with the king, Luisa charmed everyone with her beauty. And it wasn't long before she became pregnant by the king, giving birth to a daughter who would later enter the convent. Her husband, Francisco Jorge, upon learning of the affair with the king, was disappointed and went to live far from her, dying shortly afterward. And this allowed her to continue her affairs with the king and later with other nobles. Dom João Ferreira not only wrote her passionate poems, but was also very jealous of her, threatening to castrate the men he suspected she was involved with. Luisa Clara later got involved with the Duke of Lavish, and even into old age was considered throughout the kingdom to be a woman of great beauty. But one of the king's most scandalous affairs was his relationship with a nun from the Odivelas convent named Mother Paula. If his first love locked herself away in a convent, wanting nothing more to do with any man, it was in another convent that the king would find the greatest extramarital affair of his life. Mother Paula was the lover of Dom João for many years and had a son with him, and the nun had enormous influence over the king. Dom João even built a tower near the convent so he could meet with her, and they both maintained a long relationship with the nun, completely dominating the king. In fact, Madre Paula managed to get a series of favors from him, which included appointing her father as a Knight of the Order of Christ, and the king's construction of the Pimenta Palace to be her residence. This palace, in fact, now houses the Lisbon Museum. Madre Paula was pampered with all sorts of goods and luxuries by the king, but she wouldn't be the only one. Besides her, Dom João V also fell in love with another nun, Madalena Máxima de Milhão. And precisely because of that, Dom João V was called the Sultan of the West and was also nicknamed the Nun Lover because of his perverted preference for nuns, since the king liked both to corrupt nuns and to turn his lovers into nuns. We can mention as an example the gypsy woman Margarida do Monte, with whom the king had a relationship. Despite the little documentation from that time about this relationship, it is known that he was very jealous of the said gypsy woman. The writer Alberto Pimentel, when documenting the king's lovers, narrates that Dom João V, jealous of the gypsy woman's flirtations, soon placed her in a convent to protect her from the eyes of other nobles. But that didn't stop him from visiting her. And with Dom João V having many lovers at the same time, he often used aphrodisiacs, especially cantharides, and these relationships of the king were clearly not to the liking of his wife, Dona Maria Ana de Habsburgo, with whom he had constant conflicts and arguments. However, the king also knew how to satisfy his wife, with whom he had 7 children, and he took advantage of Brazil's wealth to give gifts to the queen. All of this always involved a lot of luxury, many parties with all the nobility, and grand displays of love. In fact, Dom João even named one of the richest and most productive cities in Brazil after the queen, which became known as the city of Mariana in Minas Gerais. Dom João became famous for his luxurious works in Portugal, largely financed with gold from Brazil. We can mention the carriages of the 2 old men holding hands, symbolizing the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, joining hands at the Cape of Good Hope. Just one of the great pieces made by the monarch, with carriages featuring golden wheels. Or the sumptuous Mafra convent, which is a Portuguese version of the Spanish Escorial and the French Versailles, and which features truly impressive structures and architecture. The Grand Lisbon Aqueduct and the beautifully decorated Royal Chapel of St. John the Baptist also stand out, as well as the Joanina Library of Coimbra. The king develops the arts and culture in the kingdom, with painters, sculptors, and libraries, creating important institutions such as the Royal Academy of Portuguese History. And he also carries out important reforms with the splendid Ribeira Palace, built to receive foreign ambassadors who visited Portugal. With Flemish tapestries, grand paintings, and rare pieces from the Age of Discoveries, the Ribeira Palace, which also had a theater, received Petronila Trabo Brasil, an opera singer who was one of the last lovers before Dom João V, and who left Portugal. She left with wealth and possessions, having enjoyed the king's favors. And as bizarre as it may seem, the Iberian courts were still very discreet in their policies regarding royal mistresses. That's because it was common in France and England for the king's mistresses to be constantly present, not only inside the palace, as they were often ladies-in-waiting to the queen, but also with the stronger influence of the church. The Iberian kings at least met their mistresses outside the royal palace in a separate environment, and often even in disguise, unlike the English and French kings, who often caused scandal and humiliated the queens due to their public closeness with their mistresses. One of the best examples of this was Catarina de Bragança, the Portuguese queen and wife of Charles II of England, living at the English court. She suffered great humiliations from Barbara Palmer because of her public flirting and advances toward her husband, Charles. Dom João V left many illegitimate children, with some of them known as the Boys of Pavilion. And the use of aphrodisiacs, especially cantharidin, which the king used throughout his life, also served to worsen his health and shorten his life, given its toxic nature. And after a paralysis attack in 1742, the king's health was greatly impaired, thus reducing his physical vigor. He would spend the next 8 years going to the queen's baths, where he would use the thermal waters to relieve his pain, distributing donations and alms to purge his sins, until he finally died in 1750 at the age of 61. And did you know about this side of King Dom João V's reign? What surprised you the most? So, leave your comment right now to support our work. Not a channel member, you can dive deeper and learn more and more about Iberian history.